I want to tell a real story from my life. I'm Cinderella, 33 years old, and I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast after marrying my husband. My dad, despite his objections, waved us off as my mom laughed. My dad disapproved of the marriage because of living with in-laws and caring for my father-in-law. My father-in-law, who was diagnosed as blind a few years ago, mostly stays at home. Initially, there were caregivers, though my husband and mother-in-law dismissed them without consulting anyone, claiming it was too expensive. My father-in-law wanted to keep at least one male caregiver, but my husband reluctantly agreed only after I insisted. Now the power dynamics in the house favor my mother-in-law and husband over my father-in-law. Despite working remotely full-time, they treat me like a substitute caregiver, expecting me to be available all the time. When I raised concerns, they retorted, asking why I married into the family with my caregiving license if I couldn't handle it quietly. Ironically, they referred to my father-in-law as baggage, even though most of their expenses are covered by his wealth. However, my mother-in-law's treatment of him is terrible, and my husband, speaking of his father, has even said that if only he'd passed away sooner, we'd get the inheritance. Despite wanting to divorce my husband, I couldn't bear the thought of my father-in-law being mistreated in my absence. On their days off, my mother-in-law and husband would leave me to care for my father-in-law while they went out and enjoyed themselves, shopping carelessly. Originally, my father-in-law was a significant landowner with several properties that brought in a steady passive income, managed by professionals. I only handled the payments, but my mother-in-law and husband would siphon off that money from the bank account and use it as they pleased. When I talked to my father-in-law about this, he apologized, saying, "I see my wife and son only see me as a cash cow. I'm sorry for burdening you with my care." I reassured him that using my caregiver's license is what I desire, as my work is home-based and helping him isn't a problem. Taking care of my father-in-law wasn't burdensome, but my issue was with my mother-in-law and husband, who neither did housework nor worked but acted all high and mighty. My resentment towards the do-nothing-do grew stronger. Then, one day, my mother-in-law and husband announced they were going to the Caribbean for 2 to 3 weeks, leaving me in charge of caregiving. They packed their bags happily and excitedly a week in advance. When they left the house, I took a moment to relax. To my surprise, my father-in-law started changing into a suit on his own. I was taken aback and stared in shock. "Come on, dear, let's go," he said in his suit, and it was clear from his eyes that he wasn't blind. I asked hesitantly, "Father-in-law, can you see?" He replied, "Not perfectly. Blindness can't be cured completely." 3 weeks later, my father-in-law handed me a business card indicating his desired destination. Oblivious to his plans, my husband and mother-in-law returned from their trip, relaxed and refreshed. As the fun times ended too soon, they found themselves back to the harsh reality in the blink of an eye. The prospect of facing my father-in-law's gloomy face again led them to express their dissatisfaction. "Next time, let's go to the Maldives," my husband suggested. Their complaints about my father-in-law and me started mere moments after their return. Within 10 minutes, the doorbell rang, and I answered through the monitor. To my surprise, 2 men in suits stood at the front door. As I went to greet them, my husband and mother-in-law looked puzzled. "Oh, it's James's lawyer. What brings you here?" my husband inquired. However, their confusion heightened as my father-in-law walked into the living room, guiding the lawyers to a chair and sitting down himself. The unexpected sight of him walking and sitting down on his own left my husband and mother-in-law reluctant, but finally seated. I was called over by my father-in-law and took a seat next to him. "Today, I've set up this meeting for 3 reasons," he began. "The first one is about your husband's affair." With these words, he pulled out a photograph from an envelope, revealing my husband, my mother-in-law, and an unfamiliar woman. The intimacy captured in the photo suggested that something was amiss. Neither my husband nor my mother-in-law uttered a word in response as more photos emerged from the envelope. The images showed my husband with his arm around the woman, enjoying her company in various locations. Some photos even depicted them entering a hotel at different times and places. I've known about your husband's infidelity since he married you, my father-in-law continued. He didn't just go to the Caribbean with the two of you, he was with her too. Presented with irrefutable evidence of his cheating, my husband seemed at a loss for words. My father-in-law questioned him, "Why? How did you?" It appeared my husband had believed he had gotten away with it. In truth, I hadn't noticed amidst my work, household chores, and caregiving responsibilities. I had little time to ponder his actions, assuming he was simply enjoying outings with his mom. Facing the undeniable proof, my husband could only mumble in response. Breaking the tense silence, he admitted, "Well, if we've been found out, so be it. Yes, you're just a caregiver to him. He has a new partner now, a so-called common-law wife, if you will." My mother-in-law remarked with a laugh. Stunned, I confronted my husband directly, asking, "Is this true?" Without attempting to explain, he mumbled, "Oh well," revealing that they had recently rented a place for just the two of them. While they were enjoying their time, I stayed alone in a hotel. According to my mother-in-law, this situation had been ongoing for over a year. She expressed her belief that the other woman made a better companion for my son than I did, emphasizing my apparent inability to spend time with him. Her solution? I should have divorced my husband if I wanted to maintain such a lifestyle. In response to her suggestion, my father-in-law admitted that he had considered letting his son divorce me. However, the other woman wasn't willing to take care of James, so they were left in a difficult position. As a potential resolution, they casually mentioned the option of putting James in a facility in a couple of years. Hearing this callous discussion, shock and disbelief overcame me. My husband continued to speak, proposing an immediate divorce, but warning me not to expect any compensation in the settlement, since I would be abandoning caregiving responsibilities. In an instant, my sorrow transformed into anger. I couldn't accept their callous attitude toward caregiving and my life. Unable to tolerate their heartless approach, I confronted them, expressing that they couldn't treat life like a game. My father-in-law, fueled by newfound energy, jumped up and yelled at both my husband and mother-in-law, catching them off guard. It became apparent that they had been hiding something, as my father-in-law accused my husband of pretending to be blind. My husband desperately tried to deflect attention, claiming partial blindness and ongoing treatments at an intermediate stage. Frustrated, I questioned why he had pretended to be completely blind and allowed us to assume so. He revealed that when he woke up with bad eyesight, he visited the hospital with a caregiver and returned in a wheelchair. However, he chose not to correct our misunderstanding, wanting to see how things played out because it seemed like we were happy about his blindness. His revelation left both my husband and mother-in-law looking away, unable to meet our eyes. The blindness misconception had persisted since my father-in-law's diagnosis. Just a month before I married my husband, I had assumed he was completely blind based on my husband's description. Father-in-law then shifted the conversation to divorce, suggesting that the daughter-in-law, referring to me, could decide on the course of action. He even offered to introduce me to a lawyer. However, the divorce he spoke of wasn't between my husband and me. It was between him and my mother-in-law. As he stared straight at her, he declared that they needed to talk about the last point. "I want my money back," exclaimed the father-in-law, revealing a troubling financial situation. As it turned out, he had been providing a monthly living allowance to the mother-in-law. However, she had been dipping into other savings, and shockingly, it was from the inheritance left by the father-in-law's father. This inheritance was intended to be preserved, yet the mother-in-law, thinking the blind father-in-law wouldn't notice, had misappropriated the funds. Addressing the issue, the father-in-law expressed his concerns about the mother-in-law's tendency to be lavished with money. To prevent her from spending from other sources, he had arranged for a set amount to be transferred through the home caregiver. However, given her spending habits, he had kept separate accounts for his earnings and the inheritance. When he checked with the bank a year later, approximately $60,000 had been spent within that time frame. The staggering amount left everyone astonished, considering how recklessly the mother-in-law had been spending every month. While the daughter-in-law struggled to fathom what she would do with such a sum, the mother-in-law nonchalantly regarded it as mere pocket change. Unwilling to repay the substantial amount, she argued that it was also her money, whether it was an inheritance or not. The father-in-law, however, clarified the inheritance law, stating that even in the event of a divorce, the inheritance wouldn't go to the daughter-in-law. He proposed a deal. If she could repay the $60,000 all at once, he would consider not proceeding with the divorce. However, if she couldn't, he suggested accepting it as property division and quietly agreeing to a divorce. The real estate owned by the father-in-law, which originally came from his father's inheritance, couldn't be claimed by the mother-in-law in a property division. Despite this revelation, the daughter-in-law grappled with the situation. As the father-in-law waited for her decision, the husband desperately clung to his father's feet, expressing remorse and a desire to change. Acknowledging the error of her ways, the daughter-in-law sought forgiveness from the father-in-law, realizing the folly of putting up with her husband's behavior just because she loved him. She made a firm decision, expressing her intent to seek compensation in the divorce proceedings and officially divorce her husband. The plea for forgiveness and the decision to end the marriage marked a significant turning point in the tumultuous family dynamic. I had lost all feelings for my husband and decided to demand compensation in the divorce proceedings. Simultaneously, I received a divorce application from a meticulous lawyer. Without hesitation, I signed it right there. My husband, realizing the financial strain, voiced concern about not having the money to pay any compensation. The father-in-law suggested he start a part-time job or find a way to pay it back. In an unexpected turn, he allowed my husband to stay in the house for a while. Not because he was his son, but to keep an eye on him for the sake of our son. My husband, with tears in his eyes, apologized to me and signed both the divorce application and the compensation agreement. Additionally, the father-in-law expressed a desire to give me a portion of his assets as a token of gratitude and apology. He handed me a copy of his will, explaining that the originals were with the lawyer. He couldn't give it to me now, and when the time came, the lawyer would contact me, and I should accept the assets. Stunned, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I protested, feeling undeserving of such generosity from my father-in-law, having been with them for just over a year. However, he insisted, stating that I had stood by his side and tried to protect him, even when faced with terrible things said by the others. Suddenly, the conversation took an unexpected turn as my father-in-law addressed my husband and criticized him for his past actions. Accusing him of affairs and neglecting household responsibilities, his father-in-law expressed disappointment. Even my husband seemed surprised, and the revelation led to a revelation about my mother-in-law's deceit. She nervously denied the accusations, but it was clear to everyone that she was lying. The tension escalated, and the father-in-law forced the mother-in-law to sign the divorce papers. She was told to pack her bags and leave without any resistance. As a result, the mother-in-law left the house, and that day marked the official end of their marriage through divorce. Regarding the compensation for my husband's divorce proceedings, my father-in-law paid it off in a lump sum, believing it would be better for me. My husband, in turn, would repay his father. I packed my things to return to my parents' home, grateful for the unexpected turn of events in the big house thanks to my father-in-law. My husband lived on the second floor, and we had established certain restrictions to avoid crossing paths. I successfully managed to avoid them for a whole month after everything had settled. On the day of my move, the intercom rang, and to my surprise, my parents appeared on the screen. When I went to the front door, my father was already crying, while my mother wore a smile. It turned out that my father-in-law had generously covered the travel expenses and arranged everything for my move. Although I had only informed my parents about the divorce, they were already aware of the challenging year I had faced. As it unfolded, My father had received a call from my father-in-law about 6 months after my wedding. Father-in-law, being honest about the situation, had expressed his commitment to take responsibility and discipline my husband. He requested my father to wait a little longer before coming to get me. Having heard the entire story from mother-in-law to husband to father-in-law, my father understood that simply telling me to come back wouldn't be convincing. Accepting claims of infidelity about someone I loved, especially without evidence or valid reasons, would be difficult. Therefore, he chose to trust his father-in-law's judgment. 2 years had passed since then, and it appeared that my husband had been repaying my father-in-law little by little. Fortunately, my job, which had been fully remote from the start, didn't tie me to a particular location. I still occasionally communicated with my father-in-law, and my work was going well. Despite initial worries that I might become weary of love, that was not the case. I had already moved on and found happiness with a new boyfriend, living a relaxed and content life with my family. I hope you guys enjoy our video. To watch more interesting stories, hit that subscribe button. Thank you.